As large as your spirit. We're going to find out what's that. Welcome to Now Tell Us. This is Anthony Morore, your host. At Now Tell Us, we have guests come and tell us stories. They come and inspire us. They come and educate us on a subject. And always, we have some great times here. And especially when we have some great guests, like today's guest. Our guest today is known as Joel David Bond, and he's going to be here shortly just to tell us about that as large as your spirit and what it's all about. But before we go to meet Joel, please can you share this episode with all your friends? If you have a question, ask. If you have any feedback, we love feedback. And therefore, we thank you in advance. Yes, let's go and meet Joel to hear what's that all about. If you're ready, let's go. Hi, Joel.
Hi, how are you doing, Anthony?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you at Now Tell Us. We really appreciate seeing new guests land here and come to just tell us things that we will be interested to hear.
All right, excellent.
Yeah, which part of the world are you, if I may ask?
Currently in Kansas City in the United States. It's where I was born and raised. So I haven't lived here for 20 years, but have found myself back here sort of unexpectedly in the past couple of months. And yeah, back in my home roots.
Wow, I guess it's springtime right now, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, yeah. The weather changes every day. We get 4 seasons in a minute.
Okay, so I get to know that you've been all around the world. What have you been doing all around the world? What's your profession? What's have you? Yeah, please let us know.
Yeah, well, my general motive, my sort of purpose in life is to help people build bridges, to make connections across cultures, faith, socioeconomic, political divides. Basically, I really love to help people navigate their cross-cultural space. And I've done that through a variety of different efforts, through outdoor education, through teaching English as a second language, through formal education settings, and temporarily, even for a short period, as a flight attendant. So I've done quite a number of things living around the world. And yeah, my goal is really just to help people connect.
Which parts of the world have you been to?
Oh, it's probably easier to say which ones I haven't been.
It's a good
But
one.
I've been resident in the U.S., France, the United Kingdom, where I naturalized as a citizen several years ago, and then most recently have spent 7 years in the northern Kurdistan region of Iraq.
Iraq. Now that's a. I know you in other places that you go to. How was Iraq? Because maybe what I see on the news and on the internet could be something very different. How was it living 7 years there?
Yes, the news, what I tell people, the news is true,
Mm-hmm.
but it's only 1% of reality. The 99% of daily life is daily life. Taking your kids
Mm.
to school, going to the supermarket, going to the football game, hanging out with friends, going to the restaurant, whatever it is, taking the dog for a walk. It's a normal place to live, just as any other place in the world. It just so happens it has negative press due to political instability, and a lot of that's going on in the region there. So I found living there was absolutely delightful. When I first moved there, I had the same impression. I was like, oh my gosh, like is it safe? Can I move to a country like Iraq?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Thinking that I wouldn't stay for longer than maybe, a couple weeks even. I thought,
Mm-hmm.
I've been given this 1 year contract. Maybe I'll disappear after a month because it'll be terrible. Stayed for 7 years because I loved it. Found the most hospitable people of anywhere in the world. So open, so loving, so kind, so much history, depth of character and personality and culture in a way that I never really imagined, and just absolutely fell in love with it. And I think anybody who has a chance to travel there really should go and immerse themselves in the culture because it is just so, unexpectedly surprising.
What would you say held you there for that long, even having thought that I'm not gonna stay here, and then you find yourself going there, staying there 7 years?
Well, I think it's the thing that keeps people anywhere, really, is the sense of community, sense of
Hmm.
belonging, and a sense of
Hmm.
purpose. And so I found myself early on being able to forge really deep friendships at a very rapid pace, actually, and found myself with a meaningful purpose to help rebuild education in a post conflict society and to invest in the lives of young people who were being raised up basically in positions of leadership for politics and business and being in charge of the future leaders of the country. So I found there was an amazing purpose to be put in there, and then also an amazing community that I was able to build with both expats and locals in such a way that it was just why leave, because I found both of those things which everybody wants no matter where you are in the world.
Did you ever come across that 1% that the news love? Like, found yourself in a position where you're like, oh, I thought so. I thought I'm, I'm gonna be in danger.
um, Yes, only kind of on a tangent, and it's probably a story best saved for later in the episode. But I would say the 1% of danger that I ran across was actually my exit from the country. I was called by the U.S. State Department and told to leave because of a threat against my safety in the region, particularly me.
Oh.
So I have expat friends that are still in the country. I know people that are still there. People still travel to Iraq, and it is safe in many ways. But I found myself in a position, unfortunately, where that 1% of reality caught up with me, despite
Mm.
7 years of the 99% of everything was fine.
Okay, and I agree with you that every day that we are watching the news, we are maybe just trying to find about other people. We are met with news that we could not want to read, and this is because this is what sells. So
Yeah.
they will come to your place, even where I come from, and they will take the most insignificant thing for you, the most maybe that thing that they think that is going to sell, so they broadcast it. But it's true to say, yeah, there are those experiences, bad experiences. There's danger, and danger exists all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, when I
Yeah.
first moved there, I said to my mother, I said, "Have you ever heard of the city I was moving to?" And she's like, "No." And I said, "Just because nothing ever happens there, it doesn't make the news." I said, "I could trip down the front steps of my house here in England and, crack my head open and die, or I could move to Iraq and be totally safe, and you never know because, the news only gives you the horrible side of things,
Hmm.
and it's only a small representation of reality, and that the rest of everyday life is just as normal as any place else in the world.
Hmm. And then I discovered that you've been to Greece. How?
Yes, which is where you're currently based, right?
Yeah, this is where I'm based, and I was curious. Hey, what did you come to do in Greece? And tell us about that, please.
Yeah, so I ended up in Greece by accident, really, on a certain level. I had been living in Iraq, and in early 2020 decided that I needed to take a little bit of a break. I was going to take
Mm,
spring break, just 1 week, and head off to Greece. And I had chosen a kind of a lesser visited, lesser touristed island in the Aegean Sea, Samos Island, and I'd chosen to resort someplace. I wanted to go slightly off grid. I was midway
mm,
through my master's degree in education. I'm living in Iraq, which, for all the things that I've said about it being safe, is a fairly intense place still to live. And I just decided I needed to sort of downshift for a little bit. And so I
mm,
took a carry-on bag and went to this island in Greece with the intention of staying just for a week, kind of work on my degree and get some outdoor activity and some sunshine and just relax. And the day I arrived on the island, the World Health Organization used the words global pandemic. This is early March of 2020, and then of course everything shut down. And so what was going to be a 5 day vacation with my carry-on bag dragged on into 5 months of being
Mm.
stuck on this island. And of course, at the time, you didn't know it was going to how long it was going to be. It was just another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, until eventually I'd been there for months on end. It was during this time that I ended up discovering there was a refugee camp on the island where I was staying,
Mm.
and it was filled with refugees from where I was living, from the Middle East, in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Iran. And so here I am, a man from the West, caught on this Greek island, trying to get back to my home in the Middle East, where there's all these refugees from the Middle East caught in Greece trying to get to the West. And so
Mhm.
the story then unfolds as I volunteer to teach English in the camp, and our paths intersect, and we end up changing each other's lives. And so the arc of the story, my book that I've recently published, is really that search for a place to call home, but not just geographically, but also spiritually, emotionally, relationally. What does it mean to find a place to call home in your own heart? And so, As Large as Your Spirit is the title of my book that recounts that whole episode of being stuck in Greece. It's a reverse refugee memoir.
Wow. So reverse a refugee memoir. What's the reverse? Is it exactly what you have explained, or is it something? Is there something deeper in it, or is the reverse because you're coming? Oh, tell us
Yeah,
about it.
so it kind of goes on two levels. The first is just I'm trying to get back to a place that most people were trying to leave.
Mm.
So I'm here connecting with all these refugees who had left that place, and I'm trying to get back to to
Mm-hmm.
what was once their home. But it's also reverse refugee in the sense of rather than looking for a physical space to call home, much of the book deals with trying to find that internal space to call home. So, what
Mm-hmm.
does it mean to be kind of a refugee from your own heart? And what does it mean to find a space, find safe refuge in your own identity and your own personhood and who you think you are and who you want to become?
Mm.
And so it explores kind of the internal world along with the external world. It explores the refugee situation along with the pandemic and being caught away from home and how we all sort of found ourselves stuck in isolation in many ways. And so it delves into themes of, connection and community and relationship and, global migration crises and the pandemic, all kind of wrapped into this tale of being stuck on the Greek island, which is, the truth is stranger than fiction is basically how it ended up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, many things happened during that time, and you finding yourself now. This is your very first book, and maybe the only book that you've written.
It's
And
the only full length book at the moment. Yes, I'm working
okay,
on book number two. So,
oh,
and we'll
that's
see
wonderful.
how long it takes to get that one out. But yeah.
Good to hear that. So it's you find yourself in the middle of the a pandemic, and you go through experiences, and this is where now. Did you write it there, or you wrote it once you were back?
No, I wrote it actually a year after I returned.
Okay.
So it took me a while for the ideas to simmer, to
Mm-hmm.
kind of coalesce into a single project. But I can actually remember the day. I was sitting in a bar with a friend of mine, a colleague, and she was asking about some of my experiences on the island. And yeah, it was more than almost a full year since I had returned from Samos Island, and all of a sudden it just clicked. The whole story kind of came to me and it unfolded in a single moment. I was like, I need to write this down. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is phenomenal. And so it took me another 6 or 7 months to really produce the work and to get it out into the world. And so I published a year ago, back in March of 2023, and yeah, and that's I've really pleased with the results, really pleased with the response and the feedback, and it just recently placed in the fourth tier finalist round of the Best Independent Book Awards. So
Wow.
really
Wow.
pleased that it's had a little bit of recognition. Despite not winning the full competition, at least was, someone said, hey, we like this book. It's going to get high up in the ranks. So
Okay. That's wonderful. So, some of the stories, even as you are passing the message, some of the stories that you experienced on the island that could be in the book, maybe an interesting thing that someone will go there and find. What could that be?
stories that made it into the book or ones that didn't?
Let's see about one that made it into the book, and
One
maybe
that
it's
made
one
it,
that is
yeah.
going to come into the second book that is coming.
All right. So, just one of my personal favorite vignettes, I suppose, from the book, um, kind of happens, two-thirds of the way through, and it was really kind of just almost a passing moment. I almost didn't include the story just because it didn't really fit with the larger sort of context of everything, but it did help mark a shift in my perspective. And it
Mm,
was every day I would walk to and from the villa where I was staying into town, which is my backpack, and I would buy whatever provisions I needed for the day. And on the road there and back, there was a Roma encampment, a gypsy settlement, if you will. And as I sort of walked past every day, and again, in the news, you sort of hear about Roma settlements as being, unsavory, they're unsafe, there's, a lot of crime, aggression, whatever it is. It's kind of what you've been fed in the news. And so
mm,
I'd had no real contact with Roma people prior to this experience on the island. And I remember walking back from the supermarket one day, and there were a whole bunch of these kids on their bikes, these Roma kids, and they came racing down the road towards me and kind of circled around me on their bikes, and they're all yelling and shouting, and in Roma, which I don't understand, let alone Greek.
mm,
And my first initial instinct was, oh my gosh, I'm going to get robbed. Like these kids are going to mug me, right? Like this
mm,
is kind of just the in the ether of the culture of what you perceive Roma people to be. Long story short, these kids wanted to race me on their bikes, and so they shoved one of the bikes into my hands, and they're like, "Let's race!" Like they wanted to race with this strange white guy who was on the island, And so it ended up being sort of fun, connecting experience where these kids put these bikes in front of me, and there's one who runs all the way to the far end of the road at the end of this tree, and he's waving his hat in the air, and we go bolting down the roadway, and it was this moment of connection where I kind of realized that, the stereotypes and the prejudices that we have towards people, um, really, you need to make a connection in order to break those stereotypes. And once you're willing to sort of put your trust in someone, in a relationship, in that connection, you'll find that you have so much in common. Even if you can't connect through language, there's connection through sport, through game, through body language, through gestures, through whatever. And I was just really, really super pleased to sort of make that little tiny, tiny connection. And then for the remaining, month and a half or so that I was on that part of the island, every time I walked past, these kids would, wave and they'd say hello and they'd want to race again, or they'd want to, figure out, or, it was just a fun connection with these kids. And I think for me, that really opened up then the door to connect on a deeper level with the refugees that I ended up working with as well. Because again, you have a stigma, a stereotype of who refugees are. And once you actually step into that space and make that personal connection and open yourself up to them, you find that there's such a depth and a beauty of their personal experience, and you begin to hear their stories.
mm. And the refugees could be different from the Roma that you met. But again, the experience that you had, that's an interesting experience. And come to imagine of it, I would say that for many, many, many people, even as you, one who connected with them, it could be more easier said than done. Uh, just coming across, because there is still that 1%, maybe a bit more. I don't know. From the experience that maybe someone could come and tell us who's had much more interaction with them. I don't know. Well, they can only tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that initial step to make that connection is one that a lot of people have make with fear.
Yeah.
They're not certain how to bridge that gap. And I've said sort of two things in recent months as I've been working through a lot of these ideas and figuring out how to sort of communicate this idea
Hmm.
in a better way. But I've found that there's two things that really help. The first is you need to know yourself. um, in the words of Socrates, the philosopher, if you know thyself, then you have a greater starting point, a stronger base to then take that first step off and make that connection.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is just developing a sense of trust. I think we have this sense of fear in connecting with people who are different than ourselves. And yet we all have a longing and a deep desire to make a connection with other people. You know,
Mm,
nobody truly, truly wants to isolate themselves from the rest of the world unless unless you are a hermit, 100%. But even then, you still have connections somehow with the outside world or reliance on communities greater than yourself. And I think everybody has that desire. And so if you're willing to step forward in faith, in trust that the other party also wants to make a connection, that pays off in the long run. You know, in aggregate, over the span of a lifetime, trust will always win, will always
mm.
benefit you more than fear. And so know thyself and take a step of faith, and you'll find that those connections will open themselves up to you over time.
Though it's my guess that for you to have connected with them, now you find yourself there and you were riding a bike, if I got that right.
Mhm.
So, for one to connect yourself with them, you're gonna, even though you know yourself, that know thyself, whatever you are, then you can come to their level, understand whatever it is they're doing, try to reach out at their level. I don't know whether you agree with that, because if someone is coming there with some big cars and just splashing water, I
Mhm.
mean, that won't
Yeah,
connect.
yeah. I think the goal really is to search for those universal commonalities. What are
Mm-hmm.
the things that everybody everywhere shares in some way, shape, or form, even if that's expressed slightly differently?
Mm-hmm.
And just as a very recent example, we've just finished the holy month of Ramadan in the Muslim calendar.
Yeah.
I come from a Christian background with a long Jewish connection as well in my community, but I've spent a long time living in the Islamic world.
Mm-hmm.
And just here in Kansas City, I've made some connections with some local members of the mosque here, and one of them has recently had a baby. So he's become a new father, and he and they had a big feast, a big iftar dinner at the end of one of the days of Ramadan, where everybody's invited to a mosque to share in this celebration meal. Well, I know plenty of people from, my younger self included, who would have been like, "Oh gosh, I can't go into a mosque. Like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
Muslim. Like, I can't, like, I'd feel so awkward. It would feel so difficult, oh my goodness." But if you can put that discomfort aside for a moment and think, well, who doesn't want to celebrate someone's growing family? Who doesn't want to give congratulations to somebody who has become a new parent who's longed for that? Who doesn't
Mm-hmm.
want to help a friend, enjoy a special moment in their lives, to share in that space? And if you sort of take that special common moment and latch onto that, then any discomfort that you have about walking into a place of worship that's not your own or entering into a community that's not your own, you can temporarily push to the side. Yes, it's still there, but you begin to identify what that common point is of connection and say, "Oh, I'm so glad that I could be here to help you celebrate. I'm so glad that, you are happy at the birth of this new son. I'm so glad that I get to share this meal with you and to meet your friends and to see what this community means to you." All of a sudden now, you're opening up all sorts of doors and connections in ways that you never really thought you could before, and
Mm-hmm.
your life is all the richer for that experience.
Mm. That's wonderful. Now you find yourself in a place where people have run to, and you want to go back to where they've come from. What did you identify with those people who have already? I mean, who are coming from the place that you had come from, or you want to go back to? What difference? What experience that you did you pick from the individuals you interacted with? The challenges maybe they were going through, and things that you would want us to hear.
Yeah, so the refugees that I worked with on the island, they all had some amazing stories.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read about them in the book, their names and identities are changed to protect to protect them, because I felt it was unkind to really, when you're in a vulnerable position as a refugee, to really
Yeah.
share all the details. So, in the book, the characters that you read about are actually composite characters of about 15 different refugee stories that I had heard,
Mm.
that were kind of put into two or three characters. Um, but what I found was that, my stereotype of refugees, in the West growing up in the news is that, they're second class citizens, they're unskilled, they're coming to, take advantage of the benefits and welfare system or whatever. You kind of have that's fed to you in the
Mm.
news. And whether or not you personally believe that, that's just in the air.
Uh-huh.
And as I began to connect more and more with these refugees, I was just super impressed with the level of education, the level of skill, the level of wisdom, the level of grit and resilience that a lot of them had. Um, and many of them had been, doctors or lawyers or high level politicians in their home countries and had been forced to leave for whatever reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and simply needed to land in a safe space and needed language in order to make that transition into a new culture and a new country.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found myself really empathizing in a lot of ways because their situation, being stuck away from home, not being able to go back, and being in a place that seemed unfamiliar, really mirrored my own situation in that I was stuck in a place and I couldn't go back. And, I was unfamiliar with the culture and the language. And the only difference really between them and me is that I had, more or less chosen to take a vacation with resources at my disposal to do that.
Mm.
Um, Whereas they were more or less forced out and didn't necessarily have the financial resources or backing in order to make it an easy transition.
Mm.
But that common universal thing that tied us together was those emotions of displacement, of frustration, of uncertainty. And once I was able to make that connection, then I was really able to empathize so much more, and to enjoy the relationships that I was building with my refugee students at that time. So it was just a fascinating way to really connect and to open my eyes to a culture and a you know and a way of being, to
Mm.
connect with these refugees. It was just amazing.
Mm. Language is a good connector, and you find yourself uh, in Iraq. What is their main language?
So the official language in federal Iraq is Arabic, but the
Okay,
region where I was living in the north is a dialect of Kurdish called
Kurdish.
Sorani.
Uh-huh. And then you find yourself in Greece. Uh, what's your experience with the new languages? Did you pick a few words in Greece when you were there? Did you tell us?
I did. I spent a little time on Duolingo, early days to just kind of
Mm.
pick up some vocabulary. And, I do have a knack for languages. I speak French, on a very competent level. Had picked up enough Sorani and Turkish in a previous travel experience, a little bit of Italian. And so by the time I got to Greece, like languages kind of come to me fairly easily. I've got a musical ear and some musical training as a child. And so, I found myself being able to pick up, some basic expressions. But the pandemic was the pandemic, and everybody had all sorts of stresses and external factors and internal
Uh-huh.
motivations or whatever. So I never really picked up a lot of Greek, just enough to really kind of navigate and get by. But if I were to go back, I would put more effort into it probably. But what the little Greek I learned did take a long way. Took me a long way. Hello and thank you and please and the basics.
Okay. And now with the refugees that did you were you learning or had you learned already the language so that even though you are teaching them English, you can communicate with them with their native language?
That's a real common question that a lot of people ask about teaching English to others. It's like, well, how can you do it if you don't speak their language? You
Uh-huh.
use English to teach English. And so you begin at a very basic level and you build the skills up, just as the same way that a child learns a language as a toddler. You don't have to speak baby in order to teach the child a language. You just speak your
Yeah.
language and your child will acquire it over time and
Uh-huh.
practice, and so through just immersion. And so that's the same concept of teaching in the classroom is you teach building blocks of the language, based on what you already know and what you can communicate through sign language and gestures and pictures and actions and things. So That's how I picked up a lot of Kurdish. Was a similar method. Is I just took immersion level classes where I was exposed to only Kurdish and pictures and actions, etc., and was able to build myself up to a level to be able to communicate on a on a daily basis, simple conversation.
Hmm. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing that. And for those who are joining us, this is Now Tell Us. We have our guest today, Joel David Bond, who's written a memoir known as Large as Your Spirit, a reverse refugee memoir. Uh, Tell us a few things that you think that we should know even before we go get the book, because we will ask people to go and buy it. A few more things that to make us interested in finding out more.
Oof. Well, I think you'll find as you read the book that it takes you on um, a journey of a desire to return to a place to call home, but also takes sort of the internal reflective journey of what does that mean? Um, and so I think you'll find through a lot of the characters, all the characters in the book are based on real people.
Yeah.
All the vignettes that happen are true events, to the best of my memory. It does read like a novel. It does have a narrative arc to it, and so when you read it, it sort of has this feeling of reading a good story. But it's a true event. So the conversations, the dialogue that's in the book is mostly reconstructed, either from my own memory, through video recordings, or through conversations after the fact, interviews with people that I interacted with and asked, how can you remember the situation? What did we say? What did we do? So it is, it's a fun story to read. I think it kind of gives everybody that feeling of being there on the island. Many people who've read it have said that they feel like they're just right there in that moment, in that space, and they feel the same feelings and they can picture the whole scenario. So go pick up a copy of As Large as Your Spirit and have a fantastic journey through a Greek island, being stuck and learning about the world.
How can people find it?
It's on Amazon. It's on all the global outlets for Amazon.com. And you can also visit my website, joeldavidbond.com, which will link through to various places. All my work is there, centralized on joeldavidbond.com, with links as well to my social media through Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all at Joel David Bond. I'm everywhere on the internet under my full name.
Thank you for that. So go get the book, go connect with Joel as you get to experience life on a Greek island through the stories that are shared in his book. And now tell us, we like asking people to leave us with some few words that we can always be thinking about, some words that we should never forget. Which are they coming from, Joel?
Ooh, all right. Words to live by. I think my mantra at the moment is really, this too shall pass. Um, that's it's come and gone throughout my life many times, but we find ourselves stuck in really difficult situations from time to time. Whether it's quarantine on a Greek island, whether it's being, living in a post-conflict society such as Iraq, whether it's finding yourself being asked to leave a country, being asked to, find a new space to call home, whatever it is, we find ourselves constantly being faced with challenges. And I think some of the most resilient people are those who recognize that this too shall pass, that this is just a moment in life that will pass, and that all the negative events will disappear, but so will the positive ones. And that when it's a good moment, enjoy it while you have it, because this too will pass. So I think for me, it's that the words of living in the moment. Be present in the now, because now is the only moment you're guaranteed.
Remembering that this too shall pass.
Yeah.
Thank you for those words. Yes, and we've been at Now Tell Us, and this too shall pass because now we are just about to end the show.
Yeah. Thanks for
Uh,
having me on today, Anthony. I really appreciate it.
and we really appreciate you coming, Joel. It's been a great time having you around and for you sharing with all that with us, all that you've shared with us.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, for everybody who's out there listening to us, or even if you're listening to the recorded version of this episode, we really thank you for taking your time. Share this episode, subscribe to our channels, and let's keep the conversations going. And as for today, uh, it's over. I've been your host, Anthony Mwerore at Now Tell Us, and together with our special guest, Joel David Bond, we are saying bye. And we ask Joel to tell us bye in all the languages that he knows.
Well, Hafiz in Kurdish, Arrivederci Italian, au revoir in French, goodbye in English.
Adios. Bye for now. Bye.